David saw the eternal relationship between Yahweh and his people like this.
Who is like your people Israel, the one nation on the earth whom God went to redeem for himself, as a people, to make for yourself a name by great and awesome deeds, by driving out nations from before your people, whom you redeemed from Egypt? For you have made your people Israel your very own people forever, and you, Yahweh, have become their God.
That's an interesting turn of phrase. Yahweh was always God. He only became their God when they chose to become his children, led to that choice by David their king.
And now, O Yahweh, the word which you have spoken concerning your servant, and concerning his house, let it be established forever. And do as you have said. So let it be established, that your name may be magnified forever, saying, Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, is Israel's God. And let the house of your servant David be established before you. For you, O my God, have revealed to your servant that you will build him a house. Therefore your servant has found it in his heart to pray before you. And now, Yahweh, you are God, and have promised this goodness to your servant. And you have been pleased to bless the house of your servant, that it may continue before you forever. You have blessed it, O Yahweh, and it shall be blessed forever. 1 Chronicles 17:21 through 27. Also in 2 Samuel 7:23 and 24.
Note how many different things are described as being eternal. 1. Yahweh's unique relationship with Israel. 2. The messianic promise of the reign of David's house. 3. Yahweh's name being exalted. And 4. Blessings upon David's descendants. David had a heart for the things of God. If everyone did, God would not have had to caution Solomon about following in his father's footsteps.
But if you, Solomon, turn away and forsake my statutes and my commandments which I have set before you, and go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will uproot them from my land which I have given them. And this house which I have sanctified for my name I will cast out of my sight, and I will make it a proverb and a byword among all peoples. And as for this house which is exalted, every one who passes by it will be astonished and say, Why has Yahweh done thus to this land and to this house? Then they will answer, Because they forsook Yahweh, God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they embraced other gods, and worshipped them, and served them. Therefore he has brought all of this calamity on them. 2 Chronicles 7, verses 19 through 22.
Though these two passages seem to be contradictory, they aren't. David had revealed his heart for the things of Yahweh, and God in turn had made eternal promises to him. Those promises could have been kept through Solomon, but that was contingent on Solomon's behavior. David, however, also had other sons, through whom the promises could be, and ultimately were, fulfilled. As for Solomon, in his later life he did exactly what he had been warned not to do. You can see 1 Kings 11:4 through 8 for that. And his people suffered the predicted consequences. The same sort of thing, Yahweh fulfilling his promises in unexpected ways in order to avoid rewarding idolatry, was seen as far back as the Exodus. Although the entire generation that had witnessed the miracles of the Exodus had died in the wilderness because of their unbelief, Yahweh's promises to the Jews had not been abrogated. As the children of Israel were about to enter the promised land, Moses taught them of God's purposes for them.
For ask now concerning the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth. and ask from one end of heaven to the other whether any great thing like this has happened, or anything like it has been heard. Did any people ever hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as you have heard, and live? Or did God ever try to go to take for himself a nation from the midst of another nation, by trials, by signs, by wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great terrors, according to all that Yahweh your God did for you in Egypt, before your very eyes?
The answer, obviously, was no. They were unique, and they knew it.
To you it was shown, that you might know that Yahweh himself is God. There is none other besides him. Out of heaven he let you hear his voice, that he might instruct you. On earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their descendants after them, and he brought you out of Egypt with his presence, with his mighty power, driving out from before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, to give you their land as an inheritance, as it is this day.
Yahweh had bent over backwards to demonstrate his love for the Israelites and his power to deliver them. He had done everything he could, without making their choices for them, to form a personal relationship with them.
Therefore know this day, and consider it in your heart, that Yahweh himself is God in heaven above, and on the earth beneath. There is no other. You shall therefore keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which Yahweh God is giving you for all time. Deuteronomy 4, verses 32 through 39.
Notice that, although the land was being given to Israel for all time, the prospects of everything, quote, going well, were contingent upon keeping God's commandments. Moses told them why.
For you are a set-apart people to Yahweh your God. Yahweh your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all peoples on the face of the earth. Yahweh did not set his love on you or choose you because you were more in number than other people, for you were the least of all peoples, but because Yahweh loves you, and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers. Yahweh has brought you out with a mighty hand, and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh king of Egypt. Therefore know that Yahweh, your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. Deuteronomy 7, 6 through 10.
Recapping Moses' observations, we find that God doesn't do this sort of thing every day of the week. Rather, his promises to the Jews are unique, given to them not because they were worthy or powerful or even good people, but simply because he chose to love them. He chose to love me and you too, but this was different. We were chosen to receive salvation. They were to be the delivery vehicle for that salvation. Yahshua was the package sent from God to man. The Jews were the FedEx guys. He purposely selected a nobody to start with. Abraham wasn't even the head of his own household when God called him to create of him a great nation. Like I said, God delights in doing what we would call impossible. Why? Read that last sentence again.
Know that Yahweh your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments.
He wants us to know him, know who He is, what He's like. He wants us to obey His commandments because it's good for us when we do. In short, He wants us to have a personal relationship with us. This applies not only to the Jews, but to anyone who knows Yahweh as God. You may be thinking, well, that's all swell, but what in the world does it have to do with unfulfilled prophecy? Good question, which I'll answer with another. How long is 1,000 generations? 25,000 years? More? It's an indefinite period of time, but I can assure you there haven't been quite that many generations since Abraham. I once heard eternity described as 2 people and a 20-pound ham. 1,000 generations is even longer than that. The point is that God's promises to the Jews are designed to go on, in His words, forever. And forever isn't over yet. Not by a long shot. You're still skeptical, I can tell. Sure, the Jews are still around after all this time, you say, unlike the Babylonians, Assyrians, or even the Philistines. But except for a very brief period of time some 3,000 years ago, they've been on the losing end of most every confrontation. Remember Nebuchadnezzar? Remember Antiochus IV? Titus Vespasian? Hadrian? Hitler? If they're God's chosen people, I'll bet they're wishing God would choose somebody else once in a while. The reason the Jews haven't gone the way of the Hittites and the Amorites is God's original promises outlined above. But the reason they've fared so badly throughout their long and rebellious history is tied up in the admonitions God gave them through the prophet Moses shortly after they left Egypt. First, He gave them the good news.
If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and perform them, then I will give you rain in its season. The land shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. Your threshing shall last till the time of the vintage, and the vintage shall last until the time of the sowing. You shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land safely.
In other words, they would be prosperous, even wealthy.
I will give you peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none will make you afraid. I will rid the land of evil beasts, and the sword will not go through your land. You will chase your enemies, and they shall fall by the sword before you. 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. Your enemies shall fall by the sword before you.
Their obedience would result in complete freedom from fear.
And I will look upon you favorably, and make you fruitful, multiply you, and confirm my covenant with you. You shall eat the old harvest, and clear out the old because of the new. And I shall set my tabernacle among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people.
The best perk of all would be Yahweh's presence among them.
I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that you should not be their slaves. I have broken the bands of your yoke, and made you walk upright. Leviticus 26, verses 1 through 13.
Yeah, that's exactly what we want, they all said, and then they proceeded to ignore His statutes and disregard His commandments, starting with the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me." By refusing to believe God's promise of victory in Canaan, they were worshiping false gods, saying in effect, the giants in the land and their gods are stronger than Yahweh. The generation that heard those words never entered the land of promise. They left their corpses rotting in the wilderness. Moses repeated the good news to their sons and daughters at the end of their 40 years in the desert, praying, no doubt, that this time the lesson wouldn't fall on deaf ears.
Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of Yahweh your God, to observe carefully all His commandments which I command you today, that Yahweh your God will set you high above all nations of the earth.
That's a really big if, of course.
And all these blessings shall come upon you, and overtake you, because you obey the voice of Yahweh your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, and the increase of your hands, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks,